Hello, class, and welcome back to the Wandering Cantos. Today, we're going to be taking a look at a literary study of Aria of the Beech Forest. So, we're going to be looking at Volume 3 and wrapping up the series. So, a bit about today's video. Today we're going to be taking a look at Aria of the Beech Forest Volume 3, and like I said, we're also going to be finishing it with sort of an overall discussion on the series as a whole. So if you haven't caught our previous two episodes on Volume 1 and Volume 2, I recommend checking those out now. And as always, want to give a quick spoiler warning. Everything beyond this point will be getting into spoiler territory. This is a really great series and it deserves a ton of support, so if you haven't checked it out yet, haven't given it a read, I highly recommend you do so. Alright, so this volume starts on Chapter 12. So, little plot summary for Chapter 12. Chapter 12 begins with Aria alone at home. Gwyn hasn't returned since their fight, and Aria is really beating herself up for what she said. Alvin stops by to give Aria some treats from London, and she fills him in on the situation. Alvin hints at knowing someone else who ran away and never returned, but before he can reveal more, he changes the topic and suggests that they look for a place where Gwyn might have gone. Since Gwyn loves hamburgers so much, they decide to look at a fast food restaurant. Gwyn, however, isn't there. Alvin, Colleen, and their mom come up with a game plan to help Aria. They make flyers, check with friends, and ride around town on Alvin's bike. Since Gwyn once told Aria that he was from a gorgeous place, Alvin suggests that they look by the ocean. This is Aria's first time seeing the ocean, and though she should be overjoyed by the sight of it, she doesn't feel anything. Alvin sympathizes with this feeling, but before more is revealed, Aria decides to use the origami bird that Theodore gave her. As it flies off, an airplane passes overhead, and Alvin reveals that his dad is a pilot. He tells Aria about how his dad was always away for work and how, when he was home, he would always fight with Alvin's mom. A year ago, Alvin's mom moved them out to the countryside, and they haven't seen their father since. Alvin reveals that he really looked up to his father and he wants to become a pilot so he can see him again, and this is actually why he studies so hard, as we saw in Volume 2. So, Aria is moved by just how clear of a dream Alvin has for the future, and remembers how Gwyn told her that she might discover something she wants to do when she's older. Alvin comforts Aria and reassures her that Gwyn will come back. However, it's important to remember that Aria and Alvin both don't know that Gwyn is a werewolf currently in human form, so there's a lot of tension that we have that they don't know about, and this is called dramatic irony. So, Chapter 12 ends as we see Theodore receiving Aria's sort of SOS message. Alright, this brings us to Chapter 13. So, Chapter 13 begins the next morning when Aria wakes up to find Theodore in her house. After he's filled in on the situation, he agrees to help Aria out. He has a magical compass that helps find lost things, so basically you put a piece of what you're looking for inside it, and it will point you in the right direction. They use a bit of Gwyn's shedded hair and set out into the forest to look for Gwyn. Theodore, however, sees a trail of Gwyn's paw prints turning into footprints and basically figures out Gwyn's secret. He distracts Aria and tells her that she should go home and eat. There, they find Alvin and Colleen. Aria introduces them to Theodore and they all share a meal. After intentionally sending the rest of the group in the wrong direction, Theodore tracks down Gwyn and confronts him. Gwyn reveals that he can't transform back into a wolf, so he's been hiding the last couple of days. Gwyn also reveals that he isn't sure which form is technically his real form, and Gwyn tells Theodore that he doesn't want Aria to see him in his human form since she just started opening up to other people, and he's worried that she'll basically stop trusting people after this. Theodore is tough on Gwyn and tells him to keep or tells him that keeping this a secret is selfish and cruel to Aria. Meanwhile, and this sounds weird in context, but it makes sense in the manga, Aria and Colleen reaffirm their engagement and discuss how their marriage will turn all of their friends into family. And this concludes chapter 13. All right, so chapter 14. Chapter 14 begins with Gwyn and Theodore heading back to Aria's house. Gwyn is determined to tell Aria the truth. However, when they arrive, she is gone. So, while they wait for Aria and her friends to return, Theodore explains some of Ganita's backstory. Ganita raised Grace just like she raised Aria. The main difference, however, is that Grace was super extroverted and immediately wanted to explore the outside world. Since Ganita didn't like the coven and didn't want Aria to explore the outside world, like Grace, she didn't teach her any magic. This is why it's ambiguous as to whether or not Aria has magical powers. Gwyn sees this as Ganita controlling Aria, while Theodore claims Aria wanted to stay in the forest and that Gwyn is projecting his own past onto Aria. Aria returns to the house and Gwyn reaffirms that he is going to tell Aria the truth. However, right as she opens the door, Gwyn magically transforms back into a wolf. And this brings us to chapter 15. So, chapter 15 begins with life being back to normal. Gwyn and Aria have gotten back into their normal routine, but Gwyn reveals that he hasn't told Aria the truth yet. However, as the weather begins to get chilly, Gwyn decides that he must tell her. He reveals that he is a werewolf and that he wasn't abandoned by his family. Instead, he abandoned all of them in the name of freedom. Basically, Gwyn comes from an island called Avalon, where his kind are born as humans, but at age 15 are cursed to transform into wolves. Gwyn would occasionally sneak off of the island, but his father made him swear that he would never leave again. However, shortly after this, a human accidentally ends up on the island. The wolves need him to leave, so they ask Gwyn, who's the only human form werewolf, to essentially escort him off the island. However, while doing that, Gwyn basically ends up exploring the city and tries out food like hamburgers, etc. He is amazed by it all and desperately wants to stay in the human world. However, when he turned 14, he transformed into a wolf, which is 1 year earlier than most. The rest of the wolves think that the curse is a blessing in disguise, but Gwyn still wants to be a part of the human world. So he leaves the island and searches for a witch who could cure his curse. And this is how he meets Ganita. She was able to temporarily lift his curse, but it would only last until she drew her last breath. In return, she wanted to entrust Aria to his care after she had passed away. Gwyn was able to have 10 years as a human before she passed, and he returned to the Beech Forest. So Aria listens to Gwyn's story and reveals that she had a feeling he was a werewolf all along. However, she thought that he was like her and that she was abandoned by humans. So she sort of feels bittersweet about this, in that she knows that he doesn't want to leave her, but they don't have the connection she thought. But basically, she then impulsively decides that she will go to London after all. She wants to become an even better witch than her grandma, so she can cure Gwyn of his curse. Gwyn wants to make sure that he isn't pushing her to do something she doesn't want to do, but she tells him that hearing Alvin discuss his dreams of becoming a pilot changed her mind. Gwyn, however, cautions her against being impulsive and explains that if she leaves, she might have to say goodbye to the friends that she's made here. The difference, however, he notes, between Gwyn and Aria is that Aria could always return if she wanted. So, chapter 15 ends with Gwyn realizing that Aria is ready to explore the world outside of the forest. So this brings us to chapter 16. So, chapter 16 begins after a time skip. Aria is now older, and it is the day of her farewell party. Colleen, however, stays in bed, unable to handle the emotions of saying goodbye to Aria. At Aria's house, a ton of characters from the series show up for a Halloween party. The elderly couple who lost their phone, Alvin's friends, who now also seem to be friends with Aria as well, and Alvin all attend. Alvin reveals that he's going to London to attend a school, so he'll be able to see Aria there. We then get a flashback of when Aria decided officially to go to London. When she told Colleen, however, Colleen was deeply hurt and shut down emotionally. Ever since then, Colleen stopped coming over to Aria's treehouse, and whenever Aria would go to Colleen's house, Colleen would have Alvin or her mom send Aria away. As a result, Aria begins to wonder if going to London is worth upsetting Colleen. Theodore shows up to the party in cat form and is popular with all of the guests. Together, everyone plays Halloween games and dances to live music. It's revealed that it's been 2 years since Aria and Alvin went to the elderly couple's house to return to their phones, and that in between, that point and now, Aria, Alvin, Colleen, and Gwyn have visited them several times. Aria tells Miss Sophia that she isn't sure when she'll return, but that she does plan on eventually coming back. As they talk, Aria has barnbrack and finds a golden ring in it. Meanwhile, Gwyn and Theodore talk. Gwyn observes that they likely won't come back for a while. Aria comes over and asks Theodore if he thinks her grandma would be disappointed in her leaving the forest. In response, Theodore shows her a secret room where Ganita left Aria a magical broom, basically proving that she always planned on Aria leaving eventually. So we then skip ahead to the next morning. The house is all cleaned up and empty. Aria says one last goodbye to the house and then leaves with Theodore for the airport. Colleen, meanwhile, regrets not seeing Aria and not going to her farewell party. Alvin encourages Colleen to say goodbye to Aria, but Colleen is worried that she'll get mad at Aria if she sees her leaving. Alvin, however, tells her that it would be better to be mad at her than to not see her at all, and basically says, be mad at her, tell her off, but then send her off with a smile. Colleen's mom basically predicted that this would happen and took the day off of work just so she could drive Colleen to the airport. Just before Aria gets on her plane, Colleen catches her. Colleen tells Aria not to go to London and explains all of the reasons why she shouldn't. However, after Aria explains why she wants to leave, Colleen states, "How am I supposed to stop you after hearing that?" Aria gives Colleen the ring she found in the barnbrack and puts it on her ring finger. And our story ends with Aria flying over the ocean and the spirit of her grandmother wishing her safe travels. So that sort of concludes our plot summary, but now I want to talk about sort of my final thoughts on the series. So, my thoughts on the series as a whole. I love this series with all of my heart. I feel like it perfectly understands what audiences want from a cozy fantasy slice of life story. It also perfectly understands the appeal of the cottagecore aesthetic. That being said, the ending absolutely devastates me every time I read it. I feel like I'd have to be a chemist to fully understand why, on a molecular level, the ending makes me so sad. But the obvious reason is that it ends with her leaving the cozy safe space that we just discovered through her. As an introverted homebody myself, all I want in life is a cozy house in the forest. So, Volume 1 and Volume 2 feel like getting to vicariously live out my dream life. So, Volume 3 feels emotionally wrong for me, but even if it isn't for Aria. And I guess I just wish that we had gotten more story before Arya left. I feel like there were so many interesting characters, and the world building for this was really interesting, where it was this sort of cottagecore magic in a modern Ireland. And I feel like we could have gotten so many different misadventures and normal adventures with the whole cast. But that being said, I also wanted to mention that I hate time skips. So, from a writing perspective and from a quality perspective, I don't think there's anything wrong with time skips. However, from an audience perspective, I always find time skips to be so melancholy and emotionally painful. When you feel really close to a character, it hurts to flip a page and suddenly find that you've missed out on a huge chunk of their life. It also feels kind of sad that because there's a sort of permanence to time skips. For example, if the author ever wanted to write another Aria story, they would likely have to have it take place when Aria is older and in London, so there's basically no going back to the Beech Forest, and there's especially no going back to how things were. Again, this isn't really a criticism, it's just a personal preference. Like, it makes me sad that next time we would hypothetically see Colleen, she would already be older. Aria would presumably be proficient in magic, and I feel like part of her charm was that she wasn't skilled in magic. And also, during that sort of 2 year to a year time skip, that's the chunk of time that I would love to see all the extra stories now that Arya understands who Gwyn is and all the secrets are out. Like, they could have gone on so many cool little Irish sort of fairy fae, kind of witchy adventures. And I'm sad that we didn't get to see those. And I'm also sad because whenever you finish a series that you love, sometimes it's nice to put the book down and you're able to sort of still imagine the characters going on more adventures and having fun, and you're able to basically write, fan fiction in your head. But with a story that ends like this, with the time skip and then her leaving, I feel like it hurts more because I'm not able to be like, oh, well, don't be sad that the story's done. The next day, Arya and Gwyn and Colleen and everyone go on another adventure because we know that Arya has left. So, the ending in Irish history. I wanted to take a moment basically just to mention that my only other real gripe with the ending is that, considering the history of Ireland, it feels especially sad that the story ends with the last Irish witch leaving Ireland for England. Basically, if you don't know, so much of the Irish population was forced to leave Ireland due to a multitude of hardships. So it's sad seeing a story about an Irish girl leaving such a safe, cozy place for England, of all places. But that being said, I think that the author handled this history and the story's ending really well. And I was really impressed that she actually included actual Irish history in her story. So, the question of the antagonist. I think it's really interesting how this series doesn't really have a clear personified antagonist. If anything, I'd say that regret is probably the biggest antagonist, because a lot of characters are directly motivated by their fear of regret, so they're trying to avoid regret and make decisions, and regret is sort of in a way an obstacle. But that being said, I think one of the main characters could technically be considered to be an antagonist, but I'll save that for a future video, hint hint. And then I wanted to discuss just the theme of regret. So, one of the major themes in this story, I would argue, is regret and a fear of regret. Ganita regrets helping others and hides away. She also regrets teaching Grace magic to a degree, since Grace then left her. And Gwyn somewhat regrets leaving home, but also worries that Arya will regret staying in the forest. Alvin and Colleen's mom worries that she will regret moving them to the countryside. The Kellys potentially regret not having children. Gwyn regrets not telling Aria the truth right away, but is worried that he'll regret telling her now that they've known each other for so long. And Aria is worried that she'll regret not leaving the forest, but also is worried that she'll regret leaving. And so forth. This story is basically full of characters who are either regretting their decisions or not taking action out of a fear of regretting the action. But yeah, I think that's going to pretty much wrap this up. I basically just wanted to also say that, regret to me is an interesting theme since it usually has two sides. That's the whole to be or not to be, to act or not to act. It's impossible to know which is the right decision, so either route may end up in regret. I also feel like regret is sort of slept on when it comes to sad themes. Death is usually considered to be one of the saddest plot points, but it's usually actually the regrets that come with death that make it so sad. And I feel like the ending is sort of interesting with these themes of regret in mind, because some people will immediately think that Aria made the right decision, but others, like me, will wonder if she will regret leaving the safety and comfort of her found family for the big city. Especially since Grace still feels somewhat ambiguous as a character when it comes to her morals, objectives, motivations, etc. She's upfront about wanting to use Aria for her magical abilities and use her, but also claims that she can help Aria grow and that it will be, for the best. So, yeah. Thanks for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Please consider subscribing and giving the video a like if you enjoyed it. It really just helps to grow the channel, but also more importantly, it helps to grow sort of the discourse and the conversation in the comments below. When I first finished reading this series, I immediately looked it up online to try to find some conversation around it, and I found that there was basically nothing online about it. So I sort of made this series in hopes that I could find either people who had already read it or that I could motivate people to read it and then basically discuss it with me. So as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the series in the comments below. Do you agree with my criticisms? And also, do you agree with my sort of interpretations and sort of my thoughts? I'd be especially interested in hearing, basically what your thoughts are in regards to the ending. Do you think it's bittersweet? Do you think it's not? Do you think it's purely happy? Did you also, cry at the ending? Did you sort of feel like it was devastating? Because I personally felt like it was a super emotionally devastating ending. Even if it's not emotionally devastating for Aria, I just felt like in general it was super devastating. But yeah, let me know in the comments. But with that being said, I'm going to wrap this one up. So take care, and I will see you in the next one.